Yeah,
I
yeah,
come in all
yeah.
the
It's
time.
really
It's
just a
an
part
hour,
of it. Yeah, yeah. And how long have you been at Rutgers?
About 25, 28 years. Quite a while.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, that's a major institution. That Ashford paper that he had, the original thing was in the Rutgers Law
Oh, was
Review.
it? Oh,
Yeah. Welcome, welcome very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program Dr. Benjamin Barber. And Dr. Barber is the Walt Whitman Professor of Political Science at the Rutgers University. He has an institution that is very, very important there in terms of, particularly in terms of understanding democracy and the threats to it. And Dr. Barber, Benjamin, if I may, welcome very much to Conversations.
Thank you, Harold. I'm delighted to be with you today.
Yeah, and to our new Manhattan Neighborhood Access Studios here in New York.
Very accessible.
Yes, right. And we're going to want to talk about civil society and that sort of thing, because you've written very, very definitively on it. You've written a number of books. You have more coming out. We'll talk about those. But I wonder, maybe you could. People like to have it in these kind of programs. If you could maybe share your own background, maybe some academic or personal background, and then maybe we could talk some about the human condition, technology, information technologies, democracy, and the threats there too.
That's great. You said we have about 3 weeks for the interview.
That's it.
Right?
That's it.
Good.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Let me talk a little bit about just where I come from. Anyone who's read my work knows that I'm very interested in democracy, in internationalism, in issues of that, and that started pretty young because I had the good fortune as a student to go to a place called the Stockbridge School up in western Massachusetts that was run by a German educator who had fled the Nazis, a man named Hans Mader.
Okay.
And in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, he ran a place called the Stockbridge School. It flew the UN flag.
All right.
10% of the students there were African-American kids from the ghetto. This was even before Brown versus Board of Education.
Just
It was
like
more
a prep
public
school?
schools.
Like a prep
It was,
school?
nah, it was an international progressive boarding school, but
you're
it
talking
wasn't.
about being young. You're a young kid.
Yeah, I'm talking about high school here. We're
Yeah,
talking
all right,
about high
right,
school.
right.
And had an international teaching staff. We used to travel all over the country. Went to TVA, went to Quebec, went to France on spring trips, and we were able to really get a sense of what the world around us looked like. Then when I went to college, I spent my first year in Switzerland, a place called the Albert Schweitzer College.
Okay.
And went back to Grinnell College in Iowa. My family was from
Grinnell, yeah,
Iowa,
sure.
you know, Grinnell.
Yeah.
And then back my junior year to the London School of Economics and Political Science, and finally Grinnell, and then I did my PhD at Harvard. So I spent a lot of time in my training years in Europe looking at issues of politics, and I also went to schools that themselves were small democratic communities.
Okay.
The Stockbridge School, Hans Mader's school, was a school that was, in a sense, a school run by the teachers. The students had a student meeting every week in which they made policy decisions. Albert Schweitzer College in Switzerland was a community of 50 or 60 students and a few staff people, and I was able to really work there to get a sense of what it meant to live in a small community.
Yeah.
So you might say that, you know, as I was as a student and a young man coming up, I had a lot of time not just to think about issues of democracy and community, but actually live them.
Yeah, to come out of your family experience too? There was a lot of talk around the family table?
Well, my family was actually a theater family.
All right,
you know,
okay,
with my left hand, I've done a
Right.
fair amount of theater in my life. My dad was the first director of the Federal Theater here in New York under WPA and the Roosevelt
A lot of good stuff happened under WPA, didn't it?
Yes, sure did.
Yeah.
My mom was a Broadway playwright in the
Right.
1930s and 40s and
Okay.
50s, and then wrote for television and radio from then until she died about 4 or 5 years ago. So they were really on the theater side, but certainly New York cosmopolitan people who you know,
Socially
made me
aware,
think a lot.
socially
Oh, sure. You
concerned,
couldn't.
and that
I
sort
don't
of
think
thing,
you
yeah.
could come up in theater in the 1930s and not be socially aware.
Yeah,
My
right.
father taught at Yale Drama School, and they started something called the Living Newspaper back then, which was
My daughter's there now.
Is she?
Yeah, right.
Good.
I happen
Well,
to say, yeah. But
The Living Newspaper was an attempt to take stories from the news and use them to paint a dramatic portrait of the social issues of the time, and that
Right.
was in the 1930s and
Right.
40s, a way of looking at the world. So yeah, there was a lot of social awareness around the dinner table.
That's important, don't you think? I mean, the family or the extended family in that kind of a context of having social concern and that kind of thing is part
Yeah,
of
we sure get it somewhere. I mean, I
getting
don't
that
know.
curiosity and
You
keeping
get it
is
somewhere.
really
I mean, some people get it at home, some people get it at school,
Yeah.
some people have an aunt or an uncle or maybe a good friend who does it. It doesn't just form like Venus on the half shell inside your brain.
Right.
It's got to come, you've got to have it reinforced somewhere.
And in a certain sense, in the name of what we call education, to bring out, that's the most important quality in terms of education, or perhaps even in terms of, you talk very well, if I may, and you're writing about citizenship, the quality of citizenship and caring. that's the most important kind of quality in a certain sense, an active interest and curiosity and concern for the society in which we find ourselves is the mark of citizenship that we want to encourage on a broad kind of scale, don't we? Don't you?
Yeah,
in terms of safeguarding democracy.
You know, in the first
ultimately.
community everyone belongs to is their family. And I guess we learn something about how you relate to other people, what it means to be a responsible or irresponsible person through what we learn in our families. I'd hate to think, though, we depended on the family for it. There are too many broken families, too many families in trouble. My parents got divorced when I was fairly young, so I don't think we can depend on the family, unfortunately. I wish we could, for that kind of education and responsibility, and we have to look to other institutions as well, whether it's the church or the synagogue or the school or the university or the town in which people live. But we need a lot of support, we need a lot of reinforcement, and the family sure isn't going to do it by itself.
Yeah, I know. I was just talking with a friend. We had Thanksgiving. You know, we're in the holiday season, 97 here, and we were talking to some friends. We're talking. I was reminiscing about growing up and had a dog, and they said they're living out in a suburb of New Jersey. And they said they can't let the dog loose off the leash because the houses are island one to the other. They don't know each other. When I was growing up, everybody knew one another, and the dog spot belonged to the people there, and everybody knew that, and the kids the same. You know, there was a certain sense of community, I guess is what it was called, seemed to be just part of the pattern, and I think a lot of those situations and institutions that have supported that are under threat in the modern era. I'm not sure if there's a
lot of
alienation abroad in the land.
There's a lot of social science evidence that trust is down, social trust, more people lock the doors. We don't trust, not just government, that's certainly down, but we don't trust business the way we used to. The only institution in America today, interestingly enough, 20 years after Vietnam, that people trust is the military. The military has fairly high trust, but almost every other institution is down in trust. We certainly don't trust one another as much. We're not voting as much. We used to vote, 70 or 80% of the people used to vote. Now it's down to 48, 49, even in presidential elections. Certainly the sense of community is down. My colleague Robert Putnam at Harvard has shown that things like bowling together, bowling leagues, doing things together are way down from where they once were. So there is a sense that the social fabric is rending in this country, whether it's measured by trust, whether it's measured by alienation from politics, whether it's measured by the kinds of things we do in the community together. So I think it's fair to say that there's a fairly major civic crisis, which is a crisis of the democratic state, a crisis of citizenship, and a crisis of local communities.
And this is a concern that you have been consistently concerned with over a long and distinguished academic career. You've written a great deal on this very subject.
Well, I have,
the Institute,
and
the Walt
I
Whitman
have because
Center is concerned with that, is it not?
That's right, because if you go all the way back to the founding of this country and look at what people like Jefferson and Thomas Paine were writing, and then look at Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville when he visited America in the 1830s and Jacksonian America, they were united on one thing. They were united on the fact that you can't create a democracy simply by writing a good constitution, simply by having the right political institutions or the right political laws. Democracy is a frame of mind. It's what the philosopher Dewey called a way of life, a way of living in the world. And in that sense, democracy depends on the fabric of civil society. Civil society depends on the quality of our civic institutions, our churches, our families, our voluntary associations, our foundations, our neighborhood organizations. So when those get in trouble, the larger society and its political institutions get in trouble as well. So that connection has been the focus of a lot of my work. I'm a political scientist, but I don't just look at political institutions and laws and legislation. That's right.
Like although those things are important, they want to be understood. And maybe you then maybe you can, and we can weave in some of your books and so forth if you want to in this, but if you could, but you know, your background, but maybe we could just democracy. Can you give us the etymology of it? When did it start? When can we think back to Pericles in Greece and so forth? Then there were other periods, and yet they've just run this series on the American Revolution in the public television arena, and they've said that it was, in a certain sense, coming out of the historical context of into the revolutionary times here, that it was a revolutionary movement to establish a democracy here out of a context of dynastic states and so forth. Maybe you can give us a running narrative, a history of the concept of democracy itself as best we can understand it.
Sure. Well, let's just start with the term itself. Democracy is the government of the demes, the demos, which is, the demes actually were the 10 tribes of Athens. And it was a way of saying the governor of the people. We say the governor of the people, but the demes weren't just the people, but the people divided into the 10 tribes.
Interesting. I didn't know.
Of Athens. And in that sense, it generically means government by the people. Now, to the Athenians, government by the people didn't mean you vote for folks and then you go home and let them run things.
Representative democracy.
Government by the people meant that you govern yourself. And that meant that every 8, 9, 10 days, Athenian citizens gathered together on the Pnyx, that hill above Athens. It was below the Acropolis. It wasn't as high as the religion, but it was above the town. People would get together and discuss and talk about and vote on issues of war and peace and trade. But it also meant that something like half of the magistries, the political offices of the town of Athens, were occupied by ordinary citizens, often chosen at lot. The notion was, just like with our jury service, we choose people by sortition or lot. They thought, sure, you can have magistries occupied that way, you can have administrators chosen that way. Sophocles was a general. The general staff, the army staff, was taken from ordinary citizens. So there was a sense in Athens that democracy really meant communal self-government. People governing themselves directly through their own civic and political institutions. Now, having said that, two big problems. One is that kind of self-government works terrifically for a place that has somewhere between 500 and 20,000 citizens. Athens, at its height, had maybe 20,000 citizens. It gets harder and harder as the citizen body grows to make it happen. In Rome, you had hundreds of thousands and then millions of citizens. They had to do away with direct self-government. America has a couple hundred million folks. How we're going to govern ourselves as if we were a New England town isn't at all clear. So representative democracy arose to try to conserve the principle of popular sovereignty and at the same time make it possible for it to work at a larger level. So problem one was Athens was small, and democracy works best in small, limited towns. Problem two, the way they got their limits on the size of the citizen body had to do with the fact that in Athens had a population of 120, 150,000 people. With 150,000 people, you weren't going to have self-government, so they limited the citizens, and they did that. First of all, they had helots, slaves. Second of all, women weren't part of the process. Third of all, what we would call immigrants, resident foreigners, but resident foreigners may have lived in Athens for 20 years. They weren't members of the polity. So you had about a 10% portion of the population acting as citizens. Now, it's a lot easier to have direct democracy, to have direct engagement when you pare down the citizen body that way, but you have a very exclusionary notion of citizenship, and one in which, and here's the irony of ancient Greek democracy, one of the most democratic systems in the world for those who were citizens was one of the least democratic systems in the world for those who were not. And one can say that America in the late 18th and early 19th century, Jacksonian America, was extraordinarily democratic for the male property holders, white, who were citizens. But we had 1 million slaves early on who weren't. Women were not voters. Native American Indians were not part of it. And in many states, even white males who did not hold property were excluded from the voting rolls. So we, too, had a somewhat more robust sense of local citizenship in the early 19th century, but at the expense of the exclusion of the large majority of our population. So the dilemma we face as small d Democrats today is, how do you extend citizenship to everybody without depreciating its quality and character as representative government?
That's really interesting. We have a representative democracy. And I wonder if it's possible to go into a longer loop in a certain, or do we have any evidence of a longer loop of mankind? We've been around 200,000 years, Homo sapiens sapien. What kind of evidence do we have about the way we have as society or as a species, and the groupings within that species have organized ourselves over the longer haul? And is there evidence, and it's so easily pronounced by various people, about what we call human nature and so forth? That's a question that has to be addressed. Is it malleable and that sort of thing? But this question is there any evidence to give us the idea that what we think of in the best sense of what we mean by democracy, and let's just in a certain sense say participatory democracy, where each person is involved in the decisions that affect their lives and so forth, that's a model that may have been more characteristic of the human scenario over the long haul, or do we have any way of knowing?
Well, you know, there are a couple of things to say.
What I'm
Sure I do,
at?
but there are a couple of things to say. One is that we can play that game. We can try to go back to pre-literate societies, pre-history, and figure out what tribes did, and that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure how much it tells us about, for one thing, we know people murdered each other a lot back then, you know, in the jungle. That doesn't mean it justifies murder. You know, but let's go back for a minute. I mean, there was certainly a model for modern democracy in ancient tribes. I mean, tribes can be organized in a monarchical way, either patriarchally or matriarchally, in which case there's one powerful person who runs it. But in fact, anthropologists tell us an awful lot of tribes were organized along fraternalistic principles. Brothers.
Actually, Montague wrote on that, it seems to me. Yeah, right.
That's right. Yeah, so there the notion is we see each other not in terms of fathers who rule and sons who obey, but brothers and sisters who govern together. And you could certainly make the case that there is some anthropological evidence for the notion that a fraternal, a sororal approach to this, brothers and sisters working together as against parents ruling their children, is a model that's there. It's the family offers both models. The family offers the patriarchy or the matriarchy model of the hegemon, the father or mother who runs things, and it offers us the brother-sister. But of course that's true, you know, history, anthropology, nature offers us everything.
Yeah, that's
for ours to choose.
It's a smorgasbord.
Exactly. You can, you know, anybody can say, we were territorial in the old days, and anarchy was there too. Some people talk about the state of nature.
The naked ape, the territorial imperative, all these kind of things we come, and we're trying to put it together. The rag and bone shop of a history, and so we're trying to get an understanding. But I know it's just this idea of it just seems to me there might be more evidence.
And I guess what I want to say is
human nature being fraternal than some people.
My own view is normative or prescriptive. What makes us human is our ability to judge our own anthropology, to judge our own natures, and decide to accept this part and reject that part. The truly human dimension of our character is our free will, which says we may have always lived in patriarchal societies. We refuse to do so today. Human beings may have always made progress by slaughtering one another. We refuse to accept that part of our nature. Our capacity to refuse all that nature dictates is what makes us human. And to me, democracy needn't argue, hey, democracy is good for you because it's in nature, it's in our genes.
Yeah, right.
I don't care if it's in our genes or not.
Right, okay.
It's the right thing to do. And if we have to reject our genes and reject nature to create a democratic society, that's okay with me.
Well, I guess maybe that's what I was trying to get at, really, in a certain sense. It seems to me it might be in our nature more than we think, although it interacts with the situation. I know Aristotle made note of the fact that there was only 10% of the population that were citizens and so forth, and it was based on a slave society. And he said, I think he had some reference in this passage to the economic reality. And that's another thing we might talk about. Political and economic democracy is another question that might be able to be raised, with the economic context within society organizes itself. But he said that it was necessary in order for there to be slaves, in order for those 10 to be able to have the surplus and the leisure to be able to live well and philosophize and so forth, and that he said that it would ever be so, that it would be so, unless and until the loom learned to weave for itself. You know,
of course, the loom has
well, this is one of the themes of the modern era. Jeremy Rifkin's writing on it, so the technology is coming in a new way. But he said at that time it might be possible for all citizens to be able to become.
Yeah, and another way of saying what he said.
People become citizens, and I'm wondering, there is an interrelationship between the evolution of societal organization and the technological or the broader context within which those societies are interrelating to one another. I know you're interested in that. Information technologies and that sort of thing are becoming now important.
What Aristotle and any Democrat says is what Oscar Wilde said about socialism. He said the trouble with socialism is it takes up too many free evenings. And, you know, that's the trouble with democracy, and it's the trouble with civic life. It takes a lot. It takes Wednesday afternoons and Saturday mornings as well. It takes a lot of time, and Aristotle's point was simply that political engagement, citizenship, require leisure time. And who's going to be making the living? Who's going to be doing the stuff? If you live in a slave society, the slaves do it, and the citizens can be active. The problem is, of course, the slaves are a living rebuttal to the claim to freedom and equality of the rest of the citizens. So what happens today is that we have the possibility of machines, in effect, to replace the slaves and provide adequate leisure for everyone to allow everyone to be a responsible member of society.
You think we do live in that kind of a situation?
Well, I think we're coming there. The theme of the book,
huge
the theme of my new book, which is called A Place for Us.
A Place for Us is your new book that's just now coming out.
Well, this spring.
Could you do it for me, Ben, please? Could you some of the you've written 3 or 4 or 5 books?
Well, 14.
14.
But I won't do them all. But let me. I've written a book called Strong Democracy, which is still around, and that's a book about whether a modern representative system can be more self-governing, more engaged, more participatory than it is. That was written back in '84, but it's still around. It's still used a lot, and people still refer to it. It's just been translated into French and German and so on. So, but that's a book about the central question of, does democracy mean representative government, or does it mean we govern ourselves, and is it possible in the modern world to govern ourselves?
Participatory democracy.
Yeah. Direct democracy, engaged democracy, citizens governing their own lives.
What do you think?
Not
what
just
do your books
Well,
say?
my answer was,
say?
we can't do it all together. We can do more of it than we do.
More of the participatory.
Yeah, I mean,
and do you think
nowadays
the trending is toward where we're able to have more people do more of the participatory.
We can. We're able to. Whether we do or not is another question.
Right. Okay. That's a huge question.
I mean, look, what does it take to be a citizen right now if you vote? 5 minutes a year? You do jury service, that's an extra day. You pay your taxes, that's another day. But if we spend 3 days out of 365 being citizens, that's a lot. I wager that we spend more time tying our shoes than we do being citizens. That's a pathetic thing. So there's room for more.
But that goes back to '84, Strong Democracy.
Yeah, that's Strong Democracy.
But you're hitting on the important themes right then.
But what the new book is trying to say is that our technology has now brought us to an impasse where we actually have more time, because robots, digitalization, electronics, telecommunications, automation mean we have an extraordinarily productive economy that needs fewer and fewer workers. That's the problem we face economically around the world. Downsizing.
Do you think that's adequate? Do you think that's adequately faced up to by
not yet?
the
No, it's not. But
population?
let's talk about the potential first. Then we can talk about whether we're going to recognize that potential and do something.
And this is the theme of your new book coming up?
That's the theme of the new book.
Okay, can we just real quickly loop in your Jihad? You had a book on Jihad?
Well, yeah, 2 years ago, a book that's still extremely controversial, I've been talking a lot about, is a book called Jihad versus McWorld. And that's a book which asks the question, can democracy survive, either in America or around the world, in an era of globalization, of global markets, and of a religious, fundamentalist and ethnic reaction to it, which takes the form of terror, the Oklahoma City bombing, people putting bombs in the metro, gunning down tourists in Luxor, people who are afraid of modernization, afraid of global markets. My fear is that in the war between the globalizers, who are interested only in profit and productive economy, and the reactionary, ethnic, and religious fundamentalists
of the world,
and of America.
Fundamentalists of the world.
Montana,
you have nothing to lose but your modernity.
But your chains, but spelled Sears chains, Montgomery Ward chains, McDonald's chains.
They have a McDonald's 200 feet from the nose of the Sphinx now, I think.
They sure do, and they have 200 in China and growing. In Japan, KFC and McDonald's are the #1 and #2 food chains. They outnumber every noodle shop that used to be.
Do you think those are free choices on the part of people making choices for those things? Or maybe we're getting off on a tangent.
Yeah, but let's just, I don't want to lose the basic point. And the basic point here is that the democracy I talked about in Strong Democracy is being squeezed out in this war between these two forces.
The two forces being in the
McWorld and Jihad, globalization and the reaction to it by fundamentalist forces. You know, the Muslims doing battle with MTV. You know, in that battle, where is democracy? Where is citizenship? Where is civil society? Where is, and this comes to the title of the new book, A Place for Us. Is the mall a place for us? I don't think so. It's a place for shoppers, and the shopper in me has plenty of room, but it's not a place for us. Where do we find a place for us? For our churches and synagogues and mosques, for our schools, for our neighborhood associations, for our voluntary activities. You know, in suburbia, you don't have sidewalks. You can't walk around and visit one. Everybody goes in cars. LA's full of automobiles. The world increasingly is being suburbanized, McDonaldized, Disneyfied. You know, we're getting
and the media. You write very well on the media and the information technology is becoming concentrated. Ben Begdickian writes so well. It used to be 25, 30. Now it's 10 companies that controlled 85% of what we hear, see, read, and have access to the information.
Disney's made major contributions to our culture, but is there a place for us in Disney World? There's a place for the consumer who wants to spend money. There's a place for the client, But what about for us, the us, the big, the us that makes an American community, or a New York community, or a Manhattan community, or a West 58th Street community?
Yeah.
Where do we find places for us in a world dominated on the one hand by what I call McWorld commerce, and on the other hand by tribal reaction, by ancient fear, by fear of modernity, fear of immigration? Look at Americans. The people who worry about the export of jobs are making war on immigrants. Pat Buchanan talks about cultural war.
Yeah.
Where's the place for us in Pat Buchanan's cultural war on the one hand, and the export of jobs on the other?
Well, you're making the McWorld being the world, the modernity, and also mass production, and all of these kind of things that can be done on the one hand, and jihad on the other. Jihad means a totally struggle in a certain sense. It's not only war; it's a struggle against forces. Yeah. But it would be like the forces of against modernity. It's not possible for there to be forces against the tendencies in which modernity is taking, but with a sense of struggling against.
Well, that's the hope of the third sector.
The leveling and
that's
the
hope of the third sector, but it ain't
it.
happening.
Yeah.
It ain't happening. What I'm saying is that the primary carriers, the primary vehicles of the war against McWorld are Islamic fundamentalism, terrorism. I mean, there are things. I have some sympathy for the people who are trying to stop McWorld from invading their cultures. I don't have sympathy when they gun down tourists and they blow up the metro.
But there ought
it seems to be that we're in these two extremes.
Or we got Kaczynski.
And what we need is, in the third sector, we need a third group of people. They're citizens who are working for a more democratic form of modernity, a more engaged form of the marketplace, a marketplace also for culture and for ideas and for thoughts, a place where you can play and pray and create culture, not just a place where you go as a consumer to buy and sell.
Yeah, where they turn absolutely every single human emotion and thought and so forth into a commodity. They're trying to do that in the name of this thing. We got Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was taking and positing dialectically against progress, wild nature, which is a little bit far-flung kind of
but Kaczynski himself is part of Jihad. I mean, he's part of the
he's part of a
reaction.
Jihad. And there's likely to, and as the, there's going to be this. We had Woolman here the other day, and he was talking about he got a thing called the Judas economy, and he said there's going to be, you got 200, or Paul Kennedy at Yale says we got 250 million people in, in the developed world, in North America and Africa, Europe and some of the tigers and so forth, and they're used to getting, I don't know, $100 a day or something like that. And you got these billions of people who work for $3 or $4 a day. So you got this globalization thing. There's going to be pressure or compression on wage levels in their projection here. There's going to create more and more angst and social upset among the people in this country, and some of these people who are making not jihad necessarily in the sense of fundamentalist Islamic people, but opposition to what's going on rather than just accepting it, is likely to grow, the number of people that are going to be upset with that. But you still, I think, don't think there's enough people who are upset with the direction in which things are adrift.
My problem is the numbers. It's how they channel their disturbance, how they channel their anger and rage. The problem is, if people think the only choice is either to make $100 a day along with the wealthier countries and then go shopping in the mall on the one hand, or to blow up a building on the other, when those are the only two choices. To sell
or
out
wild
big.
Nature, as Kaczynski says.
Well, his
he
wild nature.
He lived out in a cabin.
Yeah, but he spent a lot of time blowing people up as well.
I know,
that's my point. I mean,
Oh,
in nature, we don't have a problem.
Right. If
people want to live in nature, that's fine. But when they go out to nature and then send bombs to people who live elsewhere, we've got a serious problem. The problem for most of the resistors to modernity is that they do throw out the baby with the bathwater, that they do, in effect, in their desperation, turn violent, turn wild, like those 6 guys in Luxor last week who gunned down 30 or 40 innocent Swiss tourists. They didn't even get Americans. That was the target was Americans, but they got these innocent Swiss. Well, they don't care about that, because in their desperation, in their rage, in their blindness, they simply strike out to kill, to slaughter, to try to stop the system. And on the other hand, the system doesn't pay any attention to the honest folk who are saying, hey, maybe this isn't quite the way we want to do this.
We need to think this thing through.
How come you're taking all your jobs and going off to a slave labor camp in Siam somewhere in Africa? We don't have, between those two extremes of the people who think only about greed and profit on the one hand, and the people who think only about terroristic resistance on the other, we don't have an ordinary place
where
people can pursue an alternative life, and
Or,
that's
or
what
do
we're
we,
talking
or
about.
we don't have an alternative visionary kind of way in which we're going to approach the problem.
We have it. We have it.
Because,
It's called
well,
democracy. It's called community.
well,
It's called the neighborhood.
okay.
But they're under fire.
Right.
They're under pressure.
They're under fire, and the funding bases of many of these kind of things are being undercut by the market kind of move that we're making, and so forth. And these things you're talking about, the globalization is one. Mr. Kuttner and other people will talk very often. You know, globalization, and the other you mentioned briefly was this technological displacement of human labor in the production processes coming along. Those two are the ones that are usually put in tandem with one another as part of the modernity.
Now let me give you the alternative,
and,
Harold.
is that not a case?
Let me give you the alternative. See, I mean, right now we say, on the one hand, globalization, the immigration of jobs out of this country, means either you support the forces of modernization, seem to undercut the American economy and the American worker, or you support protectionism and you go up against free trade to protect American jobs, you see. And those aren't the only two choices. We're put into that box. The third choice that the third sector offers is to reorganize our economic distribution system so that civic work, homemaking work, raising children, volunteering in hospitals, working for community organizations, and doing community service are seen as public work worthy of being paid, worthy of earning an income. If the productive economy can get along without so many folks making money, then let's find a different way to distribute its productive earnings than wage labor, which has been the traditional way we've done it. There's a third alternative. There's a different way to do things that doesn't require, on the one hand, selling out to the big corporations and internationalism, or on the other, taking a protectionist, anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner kind of line that says America first and screw the rest of the world.
Okay, let's back up a little primer kind of thing. You're talking to the third sector. Now we're talking we had private sector?
State
public
sector.
State sector. Why don't you spell those three sectors out for us in a primer kind of way? And what are we talking about?
Well, look, the three sectors are, on the one hand, government, the second hand, commerce, and in the third, everything else,
business,
civic and family. But let me put it an easier way to understand it in terms of our identities. When we talk about the private sector, we talk about me as a consumer and as a producer, where I work, where I make money, and where I spend my money. That's the private commercial sector. It's me, the consumer, me, the producer, me, the job holder, me, the shopper. Okay, that's all the
as an individual,
sector.
but it's all the business corporation and production process.
I'm saying that for ordinary people, I think thinking about it, you can name the abstractions, the multinational corporation, but I'm saying as a person, I participate in the private sector.
And that's but in that private sector now, particularly with privatization and these kind of the drift of things now, there's a tremendous amount of what we call power is being vested in economic processes.
Let me just do the three.
All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We got the shopper and the consumer and the producer and the job holder.
You're
That's all
coming
private.
in from the citizen's perspective.
And on the other hand, we got when I'm talking about the state sector, the taxpayer, in me, the guy who does jury service, the voter, the guy who works for a political party. That's the state sector. And that's a part of me, too. You know, part of the year, I don't spend much time at it, but I'm a voter at least once a year. I'm a taxpayer, you know, once or twice a year and so on. So that's the state sector. But most of the parts of me I care about aren't really related in paying taxes or doing jury service or voting on the one hand, or producing and consuming. I produce to get a wage. I consume because I got to get something in my body and put clothes on and so on. But most of the things I care about, playing, praying, culture, art, love, have to do with church, have to do with family, have to do with neighborhood, have to do with community organizations. That's the third sector. That's civil society.
That's what we call civil society.
And that's what I'm saying is a place for us. And that place is under pressure. I'll give you a good example. You come out to where I live in Piscataway. Right out here about...
Out in Jersey,
29 miles from Lincoln Tunnel. And you say, Ben, take me, let's go downtown. I want to see what the town's like. Take me to the public square. Take me downtown. I want to see where citizens get together and talk about things. Take me to the
pool hall,
Take me to the pool hall, the community barber shop, you know, the general store, the public square, and so on.
Hope there's no yeller dog there.
You know what? I wouldn't know where to take you. Because there is none. I could take you to about 24 strip malls. I could take you to 3 or 4 upscale, fancy internal malls. I could take you, you say, let's go downtown to City Hall. Well, I can take you to the Public Works building that has an office for the mayor in it and so on, but that's just up there in a corporate park. There's something else there. I could take you to a church, but it sits there all by itself. The old notion of a town were, for most of human history, people have lived.
Yes.
And in towns you find churches and stores and mayor's offices and community art galleries and bars and barber shops and places
Cracker
where
barrels
we
with
gather
checkers
and so
and
on.
right.
Or here in
Yeah.
Manhattan,
Yeah.
we have our neighbor. We still have a lot
Yeah,
of that
we have.
in the neighborhoods. But a lot of America, 50 or 60%, live in suburbs, increasingly, where there is no town, there is no public square, there's nothing but these segmented sectorial places like a mall, like a strip mall, like a place to shop, like a place where you work, but no sense of a neighborhood, no sense of a community, no sense of a town square. In other words, no place for us. No place for the community to go out and meet. If you wanted to object to this in Piscataway and said, let's have a march, let's get together and have a demonstration, again, I don't know where you go. You know, I suppose you could go in front of one strip mall, but there are 14 others.
Right.
There is no heart, there is no core. A lot of America is like that, not in New York City, you know, not in the New England towns north of here, not in some old southern towns and so on, but a lot of America looks anonymous, suburban. You know, there's a strip, the strip mall, there's a drag strip where there are stores up and down a Route 1 or a Route 66. And increasingly, Europe's beginning to look like this. You go to Paris now, you're beginning to find supermarchés and malls the same way. My claim in the new book is that we are being robbed of our places. We're being robbed of a place for us by big commerce, by big business, by corporations. They don't do it on purpose. They're just trying to sell. But even there, you notice more and more, the only places that are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, are the stores. Churches lock their doors a lot of the week. City Hall's not open. Art galleries and theaters are closed most of the time. The one thing you can be sure here in America and increasingly in Europe is that you'll always find a place to buy something. If you want to shop, you don't have to ever sleep.
You can shop till you drop if you want.
But if you want to be a citizen, if you want to go to church, if you want to meet with your neighbors, it's going to be harder and harder to find places to meet even once a week for 6 hours a day. And that's because we are being robbed of our places by this war between commerce, this attempt to commercialize everything, to commodify everything, and then the people who resist it, but resist it in the worst kinds of ways, by isolationism, by anti-immigration, by the politics of fear, by terror, and by a sense that the only choice is to go back to wild nature.
Well, what are the people like Kaczynski? But what about the people who would just say, well, Ben, you're just being nostalgic about a past that's gone. You got to learn to groove in a supermod world, and a supermod world is one where we don't have those kind of places anymore. We don't have places where you go and put horseshoes on horses anymore. We have to go and get with it. I mean, we're in the supermod world, and that's it.
But that's nonsense. I mean, Stalin could say, hey, get used to the gulag. That's where it is, and that's what it's going to be from now on.
So because you use the term robbed, I mean, it's the marketplace that's operating. It's the market that's operating, and that's what people go to the mall because that's where
here
they
we can
want
make
to
the
go.
political connection.
It
One
goes
of the
back to
problems
media.
is we have been persuaded by a lot of folks among Democrats and Republicans that the real threat to our liberties, the real threat to a place for us is government. And I would argue government's our only ally. And at the very moment we need that ally, we're being persuaded to get rid of it.
In order to strengthen the third sector, perhaps.
In order to strengthen the third sector, we need government. The marketplace is not going to strengthen the third sector. The marketplace is going to invade and encroach on the third sector and try to turn every public space into a mall space. Indeed, to turn public space into private space. Malls in many states, enclosed malls, have been declared private property by the state Supreme Courts, which means they can throw people out they don't want, they can keep people of color out, they can keep kids out, they can keep people who don't want to shop out of what are the only public spaces available in those places. We need government. It belongs to us. Government is the highest institution of our civil society. It belongs to us. As long as I can vote for Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, I'll take them, either one of them, any day over Michael Eisner, because I can't vote for Michael Eisner, the CEO of the Disney Corporation.
That's right. We don't have any control over that, and yet we don't call
and yet
the
we're
threat.
getting rid of. Yet we don't call that a threat.
Yeah, we don't call that a threat. The big corporate power and the power of big conglomerations of power within the private sector, we don't seem to call a threat because we have this sort of ideology.
We come from a history where we rightly fear the state, because in the past, and in the recent past in Europe, states have been the source of a great deal of thraldom and oppression and brutality. Communist state, the Nazi state. Earlier on in our own history, the European monarchies were the source of a lot of oppression. So we got used to thinking liberty means freedom from the state, and there's still talk about nostalgia. I'm not nostalgic. Newt Gingrich is nostalgic. They're nostalgic for a world in which the real threat to liberty was the state, and if you got the government off your back, you were free. My problem is we got the government off our back, and we're still not free because we got the supermarket and the mall on our backs, and we also have Disney on our backs.
Yeah, we also have an economic system where all those people out in those communities, they are spending, you know, 20 hours a day, 2 of them going out to try and make enough to keep the mortgage payment going and so forth. I mean, the economic pressures that are being put upon people are so tremendous that they seem to concentrate upon that, and there's not a heck of a lot of time left in a leisured kind of way for, you know, gathering around the Crackle Barrel or talking that sort of thing.
Politics, which Aristotle said we need leisure for.
Yeah, and it's also back again to this thing you raised early on. It's referencing maybe Rifkin's book, The End of Work and so forth. This technological, that we have a technologically augmented capability of providing what Bucky Fuller used to call life support, but which we don't use well, or we haven't gotten a system that allows. Some people have said it's almost schizophrenic. We have a technological capability of providing, on a system scale for the planet, of providing life support for the people of the planet with ecological concern and so forth, but we don't have political and economic systems that allow us to do what we're technologically capable of doing, and it creates schizophrenia. Do you think there's anything to be said for that or not? That we need the economics perhaps, and the economics have to catch up with the revolutionary developments that the technologies are carrying us along in terms of this.
It's the politics that have to catch up.
Well, the politics
First,
and the economics. It used to be political will.
No, here's the point.
But the two,
political will has to be out there to want to change the economy. We have lived for thousands of years in our civilization in an era in which, in order to be given something, you've got to work. Work.
That's the job
wage. Wage labor has been the key to earning. It's been the key to political status and civic status. It's been the key to dignity and honor. If you don't work, you don't eat. If you don't work, you don't have dignity. If you don't work, you can't be a citizen, etc.
That's in almost all the ethics.
Sure it is.
Yeah.
Now, but Harold, here's the problem.
It's to avoid parasitism.
We now live in a world which, as you just said, with the machines we have invented and made, the people of the world no longer have to work to be well off if we can figure out a way to distribute the benefits of the productivity.
Well, that's a huge thing.
Well, it is a huge thing, but that's the problem.
One way it could be done.
Let's concretize. I always like to put it in terms of particular people.
Okay.
We are running around in an economy that doesn't have enough full-time jobs, serious jobs, trying to create makeshift jobs for women who have jobs they ought to be doing at home raising children.
Right.
And it's even disgusting. Republicans who talk about family values, who want to take women out of the home, put them in makeshift jobs that the economy doesn't require in order to force them to be wage earners. And that's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. But I understand where it comes from. It comes from a society in which wage earning and earning your own way is the key to dignity and status and labor. And it's not just the Republicans who want that. A lot of women want that. Feminism was in part a movement to get women out of the home into the wage-earning arena because women recognize
so they can get some independence,
that to get independence, status, power in the society, you had to be a wage earner.
Right.
But all of that's nuts in a world in which, I mean, let's do a what if. What if we could actually concretize technological potential? What if God spoke to us and said, starting tomorrow, I will have machines available to you that will produce all the food and goods and commodities all human beings on earth need. Nobody has to work anymore. In other words, God's going to welcome us back into Eden. And we didn't have to work by the sweat of our brow.
Except we've overcome scarcity.
Would we get the politics and the economics to go along with, or would we rebel, say, no, we have to work, there's no honor, there's no dignity, you're turning us into lazy slobs? God might respond, what do you mean lazy slobs? Now you can do art, now you can do politics, now you can do community organization, now you can do all the things that make it worthwhile to be a human being. But to do that, we'd have to value those things. And we now value primarily work and wage earning because we've lived for thousands of years in a culture where that was the key to making society work. If people didn't work, the society failed.
Okay, but I would like to just make a proposition where you say we have to value those things in terms of, they really, I like Bucky Fuller. Bucky Fuller had this notion that we have, in an abstract way, managed to overcome, to reach a situation where you have more potentially haves and have-nots on a world scale, which in a certain sense is transcending scarcity, which is the context within which all human institutions evolve. That's one thing that ought to be. George Gilder's talking that way now, of all things, from the right wing side of politics and so forth. But that is something that ought to be investigated in a certain kind of way, how you can judge that and so forth. But then I also like this idea of Louis Kelso, who I liked very much, and he used to talk about the important and the urgent. The urgent things are economic. You got to have it. You got to have food. You got to have all this kind of thing, and it's an inverse ratio. The things that are really urgent aren't important, and the things that are really important aren't urgent. Art, love, and so forth are things that are part of, you say, the third sector.
Yeah, but machines
and
have solved the problem
of the urgent.
That's
They've solved the problem of the urgent. But what I'm trying to say is that if we're going to go and try to put a value, that is a commoditized value, or payment, or something of that sort of thing, and in a certain sense corrupt those things, like the relationship between individuals in a love situation or in an art situation, it's going to be corrupted. The commoditification movement of trying to put money and lucre into the human human relationships, where those human relationships should be totally voluntary and a firewall between economics and the corrupting aspects of economics and free individual human beings being able to associate with one another in a context where there is not this outside force of commoditization between the people who make up the social organization and so forth. Totally uncommoditized. Seems to me you're trying to commoditize those things.
Not at all. What I'm trying to say is I want to decouple.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do, but what I want to do is decouple.
Okay.
To separate what we need to live and how we get it from the things that we do that give us pleasure and make life human and make life meaningful. I don't want to put a wage on those. I want to say we all deserve as human beings a piece of the productivity of a planet that's basically can be run by machines, or in another 100 years will be run by machines. And we've got to separate that from. Now, it's true, some people might just be lazy and sit back and do nothing. I think human beings ought to be active and engaged, but they don't have to be active, engaged in wage labor, in wage earning things. The earning of a living ought to be separated from how we live.
Couldn't agree
but
with you
for
more.
that to happen,
for
that to happen, we need a deep cultural and psychological shift, and I understand
absolutely
it's very difficult.
the deepest.
Right now, I think there's plenty of evidence to show that when people retire from work, they become susceptible to disease and they die a lot faster than people who don't retire.
Can we make a distinction? Can I make a distinction with you, Ben, here, and say work? Marx used to talk about work. Work is really in something important.
Labor.
Work is something that you're doing, a painting. You see a
wage
guy
labor.
painting a painting,
wage labor
you can't bring him away from that. He's doing what he
wage
wants
labor.
to do. Now,
people who retire from wage labor jobs die. They die.
So
that means that it's not just, people aren't relieved to be not earning wage labor anymore. They've lost their point of living, and they drop dead. Now, there's something wrong with human beings who drop dead when they finally have the leisure to be good citizens, to read to kids in school, to go visit their loved ones, to go to the symphony, maybe to write a symphony. Well, it should be a welcome moment. That should be the first moment we feel alive. But for most of us, that's what kills us, and it kills us because we've associated everything we value with that wage-earning labor, the job that we were doing. And to change that, you can't just write a law.
I don't think there's any larger challenge to the human society than that which you just posed in that kind of thing. We have and we do have a thing. Just say in the United States, we have the Employment Act of 1946, and we have these technologies and we have these capabilities, and they are by and large, the private sector, in the corporate sector. It's in the ones who produce it, whether it's the industrial and the post-industrial super corporations and so forth. They're in a private property holding of corporate stock assets and capital assets. Those capital assets are all owned by relatively few people on an individual basis. Most people only get income by having labor to them, by a labor relationship to production. The labor is being undercut. Do you think there's anything to be said for the idea that we ought to, rather than doing away, we could do away with private property. The socialists would try to do that as an institution which inherently, brings disaster to the human condition and so forth. But that rather than trying to do with it, or by taxing through the government and distributing through the government in the traditional kind of quasi-socialist kind of way, that we could think about expanding ownership of private property ownership and democratizing the ownership of the robots as a way of distributing income, giving people income to live a free and leisured kind of life, and then have some institutions that could train people to understand that they don't have to have this kind of a job ethic that has been the one that's been so challenging.
What I'm saying, Harold, is I think
to our culture.
That inverts the problem. I think the economic solutions are easy. There are different ones. Sure, you can democratize or socialize the productivity itself. You can simply have a distribution system that gives it to everybody equally.
How?
You can do what Bruce Ackerman in Yale is suggesting, a stake give everyone a stake when they're young, give them $100,000, $200,000 to start with. I mean, there are lots of different ways.
Well, that's
The
a big thing. That's a big thing right
no,
there.
they're big,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is that doesn't deal with the psychological and cultural
No, I understand.
problem.
I
And I think
understand.
you've got to turn. I think people have to begin to. It's what somebody once said: hating war is not enough to make peace. People have to learn to love peace. And you know, it won't be enough just for people to figure out ways to distribute things and give up the wage labor. They're going to have to learn to love not just their leisure, but what their leisure can produce.
I
They have
understand.
to
That's
learn
the
to love
large.
art. And,
Yeah,
and I'm saying,
absolutely.
and whatever economic solution you have isn't going to make them. They're still going to drop dead. You can say, I mean, after all, a guy who
understand what you
retires
mean.
does just that.
Yeah, I
he
know.
retires and he
Right.
has a good pension.
Yeah.
You know, he's gonna live just fine. But that
Yeah.
doesn't help him say, oh, now I can do all things. We say that in our mind. The guys who retire say, now I'm going to do what I've always wanted to do. I'm going to sit
Yeah.
and read books, and I'm
Yeah.
going to travel.
Yeah.
And some of us manage to do
Yeah.
it, but an
Yeah.
awful lot of us lose our zest for life,
Yeah.
lose our sense of why we're living, and we die.
Yeah, but I agree with you. That is by far the much larger question of how you're going to be able. People are going to live inner-directed lives of self-curiosity. Comes back to where we began. How you got interested in the world about you. The mark of citizenship,
Right.
which is in a certain sense an individual being able to take responsibility and interest and curiosity about the world in which they live and find meaning and participate and help their other fellow human beings to participate without having to be driven like a quarry slave to it, like they've been trained to do in the historical context. But I don't think it's quite so easy to just say that the economic distribution system by which we're going to organize this system of robotic production of surplus capability of providing these things is so easily got
No, you're
over.
right here. I'm
It's
sorry.
So easily
I shouldn't say it's
assigned.
easy. It's not easy. It's hard.
Because I think we're still
It's
stumbling
hard.
over that in our
But it's-
normal politics of Democrat, Republican.
It's hard.
They don't have. They
But
still are trying
but it's
to
a
get
technical
everybody
problem.
employed.
The
and
difference is it's a technical problem.
but it is also an intellectual one of what kind of a system, if the technology is producing the wealth or the corporate assets, what kind of a system are we going to use? And we're not going to use labor as a criteria for distributing income. What kind of a system are we going to use to distribute income from a mass-produced economy that's able to produce this cornucopia of capability but doesn't require people? What is the rationale, the economics? It's not Schumpeter. It's not Marx.
What I find
it's
interesting
not,
is we're not even trying to do it. What are
you
they
know,
doing in France right
you know.
now? They're not trying to persuade people to not work and use their leisure creatively. They're shortening the work week, so they're dividing up jobs so we can all continue. I mean, all of the technical efforts right now go in the direction not of creating democratic distribution and freeing us from the yoke of wage labor. All of the solutions go, how can we spread around fewer and fewer jobs among people? So let's shorten the work week. Let's split jobs in half so that two people can hold jobs. Let's outsource and downsize by having people as consultants. So, you know, I mean, everything is aimed at preserving work and preserving wage labor. I don't see anywhere, and I would be delighted if the argument was, everyone agreed what we have to do is sever the link between wage labor and getting a decent living. If everyone said that, now let's argue about the various ways that could be done. But I don't see that that's the argument. I mean, I see right now the argument is, how do we save jobs? Right and left agree on that.
They're trying to get everybody employed when we should be trying to get some sort of a system where people can live as unemployed with economic leisure. My question is, where is it? It isn't Keynes. It isn't the Employment Act of 1946. It isn't Schumpeter. It isn't Marx. It isn't any of the economic theories by which we live. We need an economic theory that allows us to deal with the context that's coming. Then the other things could follow once you've got that.
I'm suggesting it's the other way around.
All right. Well,
the economic theory,
many roads to Jerusalem.
The economic theory will not appear until there's a political will that says our task is not to preserve jobs, but get rid of them for once and all.
Well, that is
then when that happens, when the political will is there, then the economists say, oh, if that's what you want to do, try this. And somebody else say, no, try that. And then we can have your economic debate. But we won't have the economic debate that you're talking about until politically and culturally we accept that we will eventually, maybe not this decade, maybe not even this century, but eventually we will live in a world without work.
Well, I think, that's great.
Eventually we'll be back in Eden.
Could we say without jobs? Could we say without jobs?
I do want to say
work is of the essence.
A world without wage labor.
All right,
A world without jobs, a world without wage labor.
Right.
We will be back in Eden.
Right.
In other words. And then, yes, we will do work if you define by work raising
what you want to
public activity, making art, making culture, having fun. Those are all activities that involve energy and engagement.
Those
and
are
it
also permits of non-commoditized human interaction with one another like a jazz quartet or love.
But we will not start that economic debate until we first say we want a world, we welcome a world without wage labor in the old sense.
With all due
And
respect,
until that's
with
my-
all due
that's my
respect,
view.
I say that is a paradigm I completely agree with and so forth, but I think that is an economic statement in and of itself at a theoretical level. It's not only a political statement. To say that we don't want a world of work and we're not going to distribute income according to jobs is a huge statement in terms of the view of economics that we're going to take on as one that we're going to try and consider within the political context.
You know what, Harold,
I think the two go together.
If we
I
both agree on the
like
que-
binary
you know,
economics.
If we both agree on the question, I don't
Yeah.
care whether we call it economic or political or
Right.
cultural. It's the same question.
Right,
so,
we
you
can,
know,
but it
that's
is the
fine.
major
Yeah.
one. And then the consequences of that are enormous. I mean, in terms of, you know, what kind of institutions there could be created for people who are, in a certain sense, socialized.
But
to
we-
be
yeah.
able to consider
And
that.
you know what? We could start at a micro level. We don't have
Yeah.
to start at the macro level of the big questions.
No?
We could start at a micro level. We could say, look, we've got a problem. We have young women who are 15 having babies,
Yeah.
2 or 3 babies at a time.
Right.
There are 2 things we can do with these young women. We can say, leave your kids at home, or put them in a child care center, and go out and get a job like everybody else, which
Yeah.
is what we're saying.
Yeah.
That's what welfare reform is all about.
I know. It's awful.
Or we can say,
Mhm.
young ladies, you have some serious problems. You wouldn't be having babies at this age. No, you know, so you don't really, you want them, but you don't want them. You need them, but you don't need them. We are going to try to provide you with educational and cultural and psychological resources that allow you to be first-class mothers and raise your children so they won't have babies when they're 12 or 13 years old. We think helping you be a first-class mother and creating a home for your child is far more important than having you go throw out plastic plates at McDonald's, you know, for and then some kind of a make-work job, and we will even pay you to do that. But there will be things we expect and demand. You've got to show up in class. You've got to go to school. There's certain things we're going to want the
But
home
you're
to
gonna
be.
be-
In other words, what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that argument, that would be an argument that was saying, in effect, we value things other than wage labor. We're going to make sure that the people have what they need to live when they do the things that we need them to do to have a civilized family and a civilized society. But we're not even doing that. You know,
No,
that's,
we're not
that's the
even
micro
doing
level.
that,
That's what.
yeah.
Even if but that would be a way, without waiting for the big economic solution. That would be a way to start the job, you know, at the local level in a microeconomic sense with a
Right.
particular woman, a particular problem, teenagers with babies,
Yeah.
you know, who aren't working right now and who currently are on welfare.
Well, I would really like to see a system where, I mean, there should be conferences on this theme. There should be more conferences and discussions. There should be C-SPAN considerations of this particular theme that you raised. It's a central one and so forth. So you can't get at it. But I personally would like to see the women who are on welfare be the first people who would be issued with binary stock ownership of the technological, the robots creating the wealth, so that they have a stream of income coming to them by something other than the labor in order to free them up from the adverse pressures that are being
That's
put
dealing
upon
with that,
them.
and how you can deal with the other side, Harold. Now, let me question you,
that-
because that gives them their income, but how are you going to get them to be decent mothers? And
Well,
how are you
the
gonna get them
income
to
would
do-
be, this is the this is you know, the horse before the cart or what, but the economics question, it seems to me, is the principal one, and the other things would follow. But what there should be is interdisciplinary discussion and consideration of the implications of these technological displacement
Well, let me push you a little
possibilities.
harder on that, though.
and so
because-
forth.
Let me push you a little harder,
Yeah.
because after all,
We've only got about a minute left.
from
so
one way of
sorry.
looking at this, the Republicans did exactly that. The Republicans said, I mean, the Democrats did that. They said, we're going to give you money, you don't have to worry about it, now raise your kids, and instead it just created dependent ladies who
did
didn't
that?
raise their kids. The Great Society did that.
Well,
Johnson
well, okay, yeah,
did that.
right, well, that's a,
You know,
yeah.
and in a sense, you know, I mean, they were given a share. They said,
Yeah.
okay, take it and don't do anything. And we created dependent people who created more babies. So anyway, we got to come back to the central cultural question. The question is, can we, in a world dominated by multinational corporations on the one hand and big states on the other, can we find a place for us, a place
Yeah.
where the questions you and I
Yeah, but
are
can that-
raising
right.
can be asked, a world in which people have the leisure time to watch us talk
Right,
about it
right.
and do it. That's a place for us.
Yeah,
If
right.
we can find that place for us, we'll be at least on the road to a more democratic, a more civilized, and a freer society.
And
for
that's the
everybody.
mark of responsibility for the citizenry of a country. I want to thank you've been participating mightily in helping to give
Thank you,
literature
Harold.
and
It's been a
support in
pleasure.
that general direction. We want to just scratch the surface. There should be conferences on this theme. I like your idea very much. Somebody saying we should get away from the idea necessarily of this wage distribution of jobs and so forth, because that's a major question that stumbles, you know, so much of the thought stumbles upon, I think. Anyway, thank you very much for coming in, Ben. Barbara. And congratulations to the work and for the Walt Whitman Center at Rutgers. It's been your pleasure to have his perceptions. We invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for now. See you then. But once again, Ben, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Until next time. So I don't know. I don't see anybody talking. You're the only person I can see who's, you know, to say that thing that we shouldn't be distributing income according to these job criteria.